It wasn't just me. We have been doing a sermon series through the 12 minor prophets. We've been looking at them through the chronology of how they're set up rather than how they just show up in the text. And so today we're looking at the prophet Haggai, thirsting for a God who deserves worship. In each of these we've tried to connect to what we're thirsting for, what his audience or the audience of the writer should be thirsting for, and why the prophet writes to them. And today it's a specific, he's reminding them that God deserves worship. And that might be an odd thing to think that people are thirsting for today, but the more I thought about it, the more I see that that is true. It might actually be one of the bigger truths that we've looked at. People are tired of thinking that Christians serve a God that has no power, or a God that isn't any different than what the world seeks after. The idea that the God that we serve is deserving of worship, maybe just the thing that the world is looking for, to say, well, where is this power? Well, if he's worthy of worship, then he could change my life as well. And it might tap into some of these bigger truths. So today we have the prophet Haggai, and then we have Zechariah, and then we have Malachi. But all of these last ones, you're going to notice that the titles of each of these we're turning them a little bit. We're talking more about our perception of God, our perspective of God, than our selfish nature and what we want to see. As we finish off the Old Testament with these writings, we'll see the perspective that the prophets, the minor prophets, are writing and showing people the character of God, reminding them again of who he is and why he deserves to be worshipped. As we've noticed with the minor prophets, most of those are written just before or in the middle of trouble. They either warn trouble, like Jonah, yet 8 days and Nineveh will be destroyed, or they were in the midst of trouble, like Joel. What was the trouble in Joel? Locusts. Joel goes out in the middle of the locusts destroying everything, and he says, you think this is bad? Wait till God comes in judgment. Not necessarily how we would handle things. Somebody having misery and difficulty in their life, and you say, you think this is bad? Wait till God comes in judgment. And when we do, it's not very sensitive, is it? But that's when the prophets wrote, because God said, this is when people are ready to listen. Say these things because they're thirsting for me and my word. Trouble was either coming for them or they were learning about God in the lowest times of their lives. That's the majority of the minor prophets. But today, we're going to jump ahead. The context of Haggai is different than the other ones that we've looked at because it's not in a time of trouble. We're going to jump ahead 100 years. Just think of how far that is. What was going on in our day and age and culture 100 years ago? How much different? Pardon? Save on food. There you go. So Save on Foods just started up. You think of jumping ahead 100 years as far as God speaking to his people. The Babylonian captivity is over. We read about it, we get the warning, they're warned, the north gets taken away, the south gets left with 2 tribes, and then that's it. And now we read about it and it's over. Daniel and Ezekiel, they were the ones that write during the Babylonian captivity, but we don't have any of the minor prophets. And they're called minor prophets usually because of the length of the book. Haggai is the next prophet to write, and his date is the most exact because it's very specific about what's going on. He begins his writing on August 29th. Do you like that? You can go back and check the date, August 29th, and he writes until December 18th, 520 years before the coming of Christ. Now we're in the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zechariah. So those are the ones you want to be reading alongside of a book like Haggai to get the point of what's going on. They're now returned, and they're supposed to be building the temple. That's kind of jumping ahead to Zechariah, though. Connecting to the context. After 70 years in Babylonian captivity, the Israelites have now been given permission to return to Jerusalem. They were given that permission by King Cyrus, or Darius, depending on which version you're looking at, which translation of it. He gave that proclamation in 538 BC. The majority of the Israelites stay in Babylon. They have now been there 70 years. That's 2.5 generations. They've lost their language. They've lost their culture. The Babylonians have been good to them. They just didn't want them to fight. So they took them away and incorporated them into their culture. Most of the Jews of the time are living as Babylonians and think as Babylonians. They've taken on Babylonian names. They've taken on the culture. They've taken on the language. And it's time to go back, and they say, why? We have no connection. After 70 years, we have no connection to a place like Jerusalem. The minority, only about 50,000 people returned to Jerusalem. And Haggai writes after they have been home for 18 years. They were released in 538, he writes in 520, and they've been home for 18 years. But what have they been doing now that the war is done, now that the battle is over, now that they're released? In your life, how do you respond after the difficulties are gone? We saw in Joel that people often turn to God during times of difficulty. But what do you do now that the trouble's over? What do you do when the plague is gone, the locusts have flown away, the enemy is left or been defeated, the issue is resolved? Now what? How do peace and prosperity affect your prayer life? How do peace and prosperity affect your worship? We go back to work, back to life, back to me. It often all goes backwards. God uses Haggai to remind the people that they still need God and that He is worthy of worship, not just as a protector, not just as a deliverer, but because He is God. Our culture needs the same reminder. They need the same reminder from Christians who live lives surrendered to God and who worship God because of who He is, not just what He does. The problem with worshiping God in times of difficulty and having that relationship is that we need difficulty in order to worship. But if we learn to worship God because of who He is, maybe we don't need so much difficulty. People are thirsting for a God who is worthy of worship. They are not attracted to an impotent God who is led by His people or think that they can keep God in a box and bring Him out when they need to. That's the problem in our day and our age, when we just go to God when times are tough. Because people around us say, well, your God doesn't have much power. How come you only show up at church when times are tough? You don't seem to be praying a lot when things are good. You're just as busy as the rest of us. Your life looks no different from me, other than when troubles come. Well, what kind of a God is that you only need Him when times are tough? I can rely on myself. Whereas if they see a God that we worship all of the time, a God who is worthy of worship in every stage and age and circumstance in life, I think that's what people really are thirsting for. Maybe we haven't done a great job of showing that God to people. Haggai is a reminder to get first things first. Not just get first things first, but keep first things first. Jesus say anything about that? Seek His kingdom and His righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you as well. Is that what the passage says? Or is there an important word that's missing there? What if we live this way? Just seek His kingdom. Seek His kingdom, and these things will be added to you as well. I think too many times that's the way that we live. We have God and we seek after Him, but do we seek Him? What's the word that's missing? Second, third, fifth. Seek Him in the 10th spot, probably top 100. After you've got what in order? When do you worship God? Well, I got to have my finances. And I certainly can't worship Him if my health's not right. And I can't worship Him if there's trouble in these relationships. And you know what? I really do have to hold on to the things that I have. And I work really hard, so I need time to play. So I will seek God and His righteousness when it's convenient, when there's time to get around to it. How are you doing with this? See, we may have a perspective of how well we're doing with it, but how about this question? What word would people who are watching your life say best fills in the blank? The people that are watching your life say, yeah, you seek God, but you tend to put this first. See, these are tough questions. Haggai, they have been home for 18 years. 18 years. What did they focus on? How much of that was worship? Well, how can we worship? We got houses to build. How can we worship when our place is in ruins? How can we worship when our garden needs tended? We don't have time to build the temple. We can't get to that. That's not the time. Haggai chapter 1, 1 and 2 gives us the date. In the second year of King Darius, on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come for our Lord's house to be built. The people say, the time has not yet come for our Lord's house to be built. Other things need to be done. I'll get to it when I get to it. It's a back burner project. It's going to take too much time and energy. We know what it's going to take. It took a long time to build the first one. It's going to take a long time to fix the second one. The time has not yet come to build the Lord's house. Anyways, things are tough when you return from exile. You know, we've had a hard time here. We just need a little downtime. So, what do you think God's attitude is when He's told that He's a low priority? Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? You don't think it's time to build my temple, but you have housing, but now you're paneling your housing. You have a place to live, you're fine, you're taken care of, but you want better. You're now going beyond survival, well beyond survival. You want your things to be perfect first. Now, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. He says that a few times in Haggai. Pay attention here. Think about what you're doing. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much. Did you notice something? You have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. Who can agree with that? Called taxes. So did you notice this? You're busy. Oh, you are busy. And it's taking a lot more effort than it used to. And everything that you do, you put in more effort and get less return. Did you notice that? Because I noticed that. So where did that come from? Chapter 1, 7 through 11. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up to the mountains and bring down timber and build the house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Is that not the catchword for our day and age? Oh, how are you doing? Well, I am. Are you productive? Are you faithful? Are you benefiting the kingdom? No, but I am busy. So you get up that mountain and you cut the timber and you build my house. You do what's right, not just what's busy. Because he warns them. Everything that you're doing, I'm blowing away. Why? Why is he not blessing the people? because they will not worship. Therefore, he puts the blame where the blame is due. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew and the earth that's cropped. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and whatever the ground produces, on men, on cattle, and on the labor of your hands. Therefore, because of what you're doing, this attitude that God is second and that he's not really deserving of worship till I get everything that I want, because of that attitude, life is going to be difficult. That's what you're bringing on yourselves. So, in some of the prophets, people respond. In some of the prophets, people do not respond. Guess what happens in Haggai? They respond. Did you notice that? Haggai chapter 1, verse 12. It takes a little bit of time. This makes sense, and the people change their ways. They may do the same with us when we remind them of the same truth. Does that make sense? If we remind people that life is better when God is first. And how do they know that? Because they see us doing it. Because we're not just busy, we're faithful. That's first. Be faithful and God will add. Be committed. Be surrendered. Whatever word you want to put in there that reminds you that God is first. Seek first his kingdom. And God will bless you. Not the health and wealth, but your life will have purpose. It will be fulfilling. God is deserving of worship, not just when it's convenient for you. How many people in your life do you know that need that reminder? It's not that they hate God or that they've fallen away from God or that God has no purpose or meaning in their life, but he is not first. He is convenient. They have enough faith to get by. I think God gets pretty tired of that. And Haggai is a reminder for me. They do change. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. How many times is fear the start of worship? If you don't have reverence, respect, and fear for God, you're probably not going to worship him. But when you realize who God is and who you are and what the difference is, fear is a very holy view of God that leads you to worship. And then when you worship, the first thing that God says is, do not be afraid. But if you don't start with fear, we often don't come to him in order for him to say, do not be afraid. They hear the message, they respond, they say, oh, that makes sense. It takes 3 weeks, though. It takes 3 weeks for them to get going. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. They came and began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty, their God, on the 24th day of the 6th month of the 2nd year of King Darius. Haggai records the day. Here's the day you began to turn from self-centered to God-focused. Here's the day you did what God wanted you to do. Here's the day you really started to worship. They weren't doing that naturally. They needed a word from God. The prophet Haggai writes it. It's presented to the people. They have a chance to respond. People need to be called. Do we realize that enough? We've been studying through the Psalms with our discussions on the deck. It's a reminder that people need to be invited in. Come worship the Lord. Come worship the God that I worship. Come and join with me. Come and praise God. Most of those, or many of the Psalms that we've looked at, are inviting other people to have that perspective of God because they don't naturally have it themselves. The people in Haggai's time didn't have that view of God until Haggai reminds them. They need to know that God is worthy of worship and life is not about them. The Psalms remind us the call to worship, invite others to come to know God while there's still time. While there is still time. There will come a time when we don't have that opportunity. And the psalmists say, invite people in, invite them in, invite them in, because the Lord may come in judgment if people do not respond. There's another section that I want to look at, because I think it connects to our day and our age and our culture as much as anything else. It's in Haggai chapter 2, 10 through 14. It says, on the 24th day of the 9th month in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. So now we're at December 18th, 520. Almost 4 months later, this is when the winter crops were planted. So they came home, they planted crops. 4 months later, they're about to plant the winter crops, and the word of the Lord came to Haggai again. And this is what the Lord Almighty says. Ask the priest what the law says. If a person carries consecrated meat in the fold of his garment, and that fold touches some bread or stew, some wine, oil, or other food, does it become consecrated? So if this is consecrated, if this is holy, what happens if this touches this? But this wasn't dedicated to God. What happens to this, and what happens to the one that it touches? See the question? If it's been dedicated, if it's consecrated and holy to God, but it comes in contact with something else that isn't, is holiness connected by contact? Can you pass it on? What happens to something that has been dedicated that now touches something that is defiled? Ask the priest. Is holiness transferable? What's the answer? No. That's ridiculous. The holiness is not transferable. As a matter of fact, something else is. Then Haggai said, if a person defiled by contact with a dead body touches one of these things, if this reaches out and touches this, what happens when something defiled touches something that's holy? Is defilement contagious? Yes. Yes, the priest replied, it becomes defiled. So why the object lesson? Why the question? Then Haggai said, so it is with these people in this nation in my sight, declares the Lord. Whatever they do and whatever they offer there is defiled. Why? Because they are no different than their neighbors. Because they're in contact with the same, they're doing the same things with the same people, and they're no different. God says, holiness, you're not making them holy by being in contact with them. They're making you defiled. Your holiness is not transferable. This section is a reminder of the truth to be in the world, but not of the world. Holiness can be transferred, can't it? Because it can be taught. But each person has to surrender to God on their own. In the world, but not of it. Do you remember this passage from 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12? I'm going to bring up some of the key words in this. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. See, that passage talks about being in the world and influencing it for holiness. But you have to live as chosen people, a royal priesthood, as aliens, as strangers. You have to live a good life among the pagans. That even though they accuse you of doing wrong, they see your life and they say, God is there. and that they might glorify God on the day that he visits. This section reminds me that we need to be aware. We need to be aware of our connection to the world and worldliness that we live in. We need to live as salt and light. Too often, people do not see a difference in attitude, in action, in speech, in giving, or priorities between those that call themselves Christian and those that do not. A lot of people carry the name, they wear the cross. You see it on TV and in sports all the time. Does that mean that they are disciples of Jesus, that they're following him? Not necessarily. What does that do to a world that's looking for a God that's worthy of worship? When we say, look at my life, it's no different than my neighbor. Disciples of Jesus lead people to worship as they call others to join them in what? Knowing God and making him known. The world is thirsty for Christians that show them Jesus. The love of Jesus, the compassion of Jesus, the hatred of sin in Jesus. But Jesus, that they have a relationship with him, not just people that go to church. To me, Haggai is a powerful book. Its message is powerful. It's one of the ones, in all the ones that we've studied, that just struck me as that would be a message for God to deliver today. Build my temple. Worship me first. And I will bless you and bless your people. It's a good reminder to me to worship God in all that I do. And watch to see if I'm influencing the world or the world is influencing me. If you're watching for the same things, maybe a list of questions would be helpful to you. So I have a list of questions called, how do you know if Christ is at the center? After today, I'll put it into an email and send it, but I also have printed copies as well. The questions go through the major aspects of life. Is God at the center of my personal life? Is God at the center of my family and marriage? Is God at the center of my work? Is he at the center of my finances? What about my entertainment? What about relationships? Is God really at the center of my worship? And there's about 5 or 6, sometimes 4 questions in each of those categories that you read through and you say, at this point in my life, right now, would I answer this a yes or a no? Because it reminds us that we can get off track and we can seek Christ and his righteousness, but it's a reminder that he needs to be first. Haggai is a good reminder to me to make sure that we seek first Christ and that our worship is dedicated to God and that worship lifestyle is attractive to the world around us.